Welcome, welcome. Welcome to the moment that you've all been waiting for. Today's presentation is on the Afrozone. It explores the feasibility of creating a monetary union in Africa. This presentation is brought to you by a team of macroeconomists, Chioma Chukwumah, Sherif, Tawfik, and Siyabonga, Ndwandwe. Jumping right into the meat of this discussion, the question lingering on most minds is, why create a monetary union? Well, first and foremost, a monetary union is where two or more states share the same currency. So then, why is there an interest in a monetary union for Africa? One reason is the elimination of transaction costs. That could be the cost of exchanging one currency for the other. This cost is estimated to be between 13 to 20 billion euros per year in the Eurozone. Another is the gains from exchange rate certainty. Without monetary unions, there is high uncertainty in future exchange rates, which translates to greater risk for investments. Hence, a loss of welfare in a world that is populated with risk-averse individuals. Another benefit is seen in the price system. Monetary unions cause greater price transparency, which leads to greater competition and lower prices. Moreover, because unions result in stability of real exchange rates, it reduces adjustment costs that result in a more stable price system. Hence, prices can serve as a better guide for economic agents as they make decisions concerning production, investment, and consumption. Lastly, unions stimulate economic growth. Monetary unions eliminate exchange risk, which reduces systemic risk. And when this occurs, real interest rate declines and causes an accumulation of capital that can stimulate economic growth. To explain the theory behind monetary unions, we utilize the aggregate demand and aggregate supply model. Integrating the economies expands the market size, which causes aggregate demand to increase and shift from 81 to 82. Also, because monetary unions lower interest rates and transaction costs, the overall cost of production falls and causes the short-run aggregate supply to shift from AS1 to AS2. The long-run aggregate supply curve also shifts from LRAS to LRAS2, and the overall effect is a fall in price level and economic growth as seen in the movement from Y1 to Y2. In this detailed version, when price level falls, real wages rises in the labor market and aggregate supply increases in the aggregate demand and aggregate supply market. And when this is translated to the production possibility frontier, it results in economic growth as seen in the movement in output from A to B. Currently, there are three monetary unions that exist in Africa: the Common Monetary Area in the south, the Economic Monetary Community for Central Africa members in the center, and the West African Economic Monetary Union in the west. In order to create the Afrozone, the Africa Union proposes expanding the three existing monetary unions into 5 larger monetary zones shown in this graph. Then these 5 can merge to form the Afrozone. However, Mason and Patillo's work conclude that now is not the right time to form the Afrozone because of institutional challenges present in the different countries. They also weighed the number of gainers and losers in each of the 5 zones, but because the Southern African Development Community has the highest number of gainers, the next section of this presentation focuses on the possibility of creating a monetary union in this region.
The next question that we ask ourselves is whether the Southern African Development Community, SADC, is ready for a monetary union. In answering this question, we use Mandel's optimum error theory, and this theory prompts the question, under which conditions should two countries adopt a common currency? One factor is that there should be price and wage flexibility. If prices are flexible between countries, the transition towards the long-term aggregate supply following a shock is less likely to be associated with sustained unemployment and inflation. However, SADC member states have varying strength of labor unions that may make wages sticky in one area and less sticky in another area. For example, COSATU, which is South Africa's largest labor union, is also one of the largest union in the region. Also, there has to be a high degree of labor mobility. In case of asymmetric economic shock, labor should be able to move from one place that is experiencing a recession to one that is experiencing a boom. This will reduce the adverse impact of the asymmetric shock. However, the need for work permits in concert with hostilities and prejudice limits the flow of labor within the SADC region. And those without working permits risk their lives just like this woman we see in this picture. There also has to be a financial market integration. Integration may cushion temporal adverse disturbances through capital flows. For example, the Johannesburg Stock Exchange is the strongest exchange in the region. Hence, South Africa could be the capital powerhouse in the Union. However, member states' difference in credit risk and their legal infrastructure may limit the extent to which capital flows throughout. Furthermore, countries need to have asymmetric shocks and business cycles, without which there will be the need for country-specific monetary policies. However, these are not available in a monetary union. This graph shows that SADC member states have different business cycles and their different economic structures expose them to different shocks. For example, Angola, a resource-rich country, will be most affected by crude oil prices, while Swaziland will be affected by sugar prices because this is her major export. This graph also shows that between 1990 and 2009, SADC countries had different real GDP growth rates, and Angola had the highest growth rate on average. Also, Madagascar's business cycle seems to be directly opposite that of Angola for the most part between 1990 and 2009, and this will limit the desirability for formation of a monetary union. Another important factor is that countries should have low and stable inflation rates. When inflation rates between countries are low and similar over time, terms of trade also remain stable. In turn, this will boost equilibrated current account transactions and trade, and also significantly reduce the demand for nominal exchange rate adjustments. However, this table shows that SADC inflation rates are constantly high, especially in Angola and the Democratic Republic of Congo. According to the African Development Bank, this inflation was induced by high commodity prices, particularly for fuel and food. Nonetheless, common monetary area countries, that is Lesotho, South Africa, Namibia, and Swaziland, their inflation rate has remained stable over time and is constantly lower than the SADC average. Another important factor is that countries should have a centralized fiscal authority. If countries in the monetary union are hit by asymmetric shock, the central fiscal authority cushion member states by transferring the tax revenues it collects from the countries that are doing well to the countries that are heavily affected by the shock. However, this is not a near possibility in SADC region because most countries have had constant negative budget balances. For example, Namibia's budget deficit was 9.8% of the GDP in 2011, while Angola had a budget surplus of about 8.9 of her GDP. Taxing well-performing countries could suppress growth in these countries, and hence they will have a low incentive to join monetary union because they will lose by joining the club. On this note, we will look at some of the lessons that the SADC region can learn from the EU.
In answering the question of whether a monetary union would be feasible in the South African development community, it is valuable to look at the European Union. There are a number of potential disadvantages to monetary unions, such as the loss of autonomy. Critics of the move toward a common currency argue that the cost of losing national monetary policy is large. When a recession hits one country but not others in a monetary union, that country does not have the tool of monetary policy to combat the downturn. For example, if Greece had had its own currency, rather than being part of the euro area, it could have offset the EU's contractionary fiscal policy with its own national expansionary monetary policy. The Greek economy was instead forced to carry the weight of the euro, even though it was teetering. The loss of monetary autonomy brought about by becoming a member of a monetary union can prove hazardous. Another potential disadvantage to monetary unions is risk inconsistency. The emergence of the sovereign debt crisis in Europe partly originated with the market lending to Greece, Spain, and Portugal at the same interest rate as it did to Germany in 2008, assuming that every country in the Eurozone was as safe as the safest country. However, it soon became evident that the default risk of some governments was in fact a lot higher than others. In effect, another risk of creating monetary unions is having one, or even several, bad apples in the horde. Data from the 2012 Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, annual report show the extent of the debt in Eurozone's bad apple countries. Greece's government debt reached 115% of GDP in 2009, and its current account deficit was 14.6% of GDP in 2008. Its long-term sovereign debt rating was downgraded to cast-off status, meaning it was in danger of being cast out of the EU. In Spain, the current account deficit was close to 10% of GDP in 2008. There are a number of lessons to be gleaned from analyzing the Eurozone. The first is that any group of countries need to meet open currency area conditions before embarking on the process of unionizing. Open currency area conditions include factor mobility, or the ability for laborers to move freely from one area to another, and good communication networks. In addition, South African development community economies are still diverse, and external shocks affect the region asymmetrically. As long as the member countries are affected by asymmetric shocks, imbalances in production, consumption, investment, government spending, and trade are likely. It would be risky to rush for a monetary union without attaining a symmetric environment. Furthermore, the debt crises in Greece, Spain, and other European countries, and the subsequent efforts of fellow EU countries and the IMF to bail them out, illustrated that continuous bailout is not a lasting solution and only leads to more debt. Finally, there are considerations to be made outside of the realm of economics. Opting out of a monetary union for a national currency can be a political statement of sovereignty rather than a purely economic decision.
Although the gains from monetary unions may be enticing, it is not recommended that Southern African Development Community rush into a monetary union. This is because there are weak links in the chain. If they do, their economies may collapse, never to rise again.